My husband told me he had a golf buddy who was a judge. He said the judge would push the forged will through if I tragically succumbed to post-surgical complications at home. He wasn't just stealing my $4 million estate to be greedy. He needed it to cover the $2 million he lost in a crypto scam. He lunged across the island, ripped the phone from my hand, and smashed it against the court's countertop. But to understand how I ended up bleeding on my own kitchen floor, I need to take you back to the moment I woke up from surgery. Topic Chapter 1. I woke up missing an organ, but that wasn't the worst part of my Tuesday. The worst part was finding out someone had stolen my identity while I was bleeding on an operating table. I was lying in the recovery room at Baptist Hospital. The air smelled like harsh antiseptic and stale bleach. My mouth tasted like old pennies. I had just had my gallbladder removed. My last memory was the freezing cold operating room. The bright overhead surgical lights were absolutely blinding. The anesthesiologist leaned over me and told me to count backwards from 10. I only made it to 8 before the world went completely black. Now I was just staring at a beige acoustic ceiling tile. The heart monitor next to my bed was beeping in a slow, steady rhythm. My whole body felt like lead. The Dilaudid was still pumping through my IV line. It made my brain feel like thick, useless molasses. Then a sharp buzzing sound cut through the medical fog. My iPhone was vibrating aggressively against the rolling plastic tray table. I blindly reached out. My fingers fumbled against the cold glass screen, nearly knocking over a plastic water pitcher. I pulled the phone to my face and squinted at the bright display. The digital clock read exactly 2014 p.m. The screen showed 3 missed calls. They were all from a contact saved as Omari Notary. Omari is a local mobile notary I use for my commercial real estate closings in Coral Gables. The man is incredibly punctual. He usually only calls when a buyer forgets to initial a disclosure form. I swiped the green button to answer. I pressed the cold phone against my ear. Omari? I croaked. My voice sounded like crushed gravel. He paused. I could hear the sound of Miami traffic through his end of the line. Then he said, Catalina, hey, I just left your house. I blinked. The stiff hospital sheets felt rough against my bare legs. My house? I whispered. Omari sounded incredibly uncomfortable. He said, yeah, I know you said you were feeling sick, but I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. I shifted my weight in the narrow hospital bed. A sharp, burning pain shot directly through my stitched abdomen. Omari, what exactly are you talking about? I asked. Later, I would check my front porch doorbell camera. I would pull up the crystal clear footage from exactly 1:55 p.m. I would see Omari standing on my imported terracotta tiles. He was holding his heavy black leather portfolio. He was waiting for someone to open my custom mahogany front door. Back in the hospital room, Omari let out a nervous little laugh. The estate documents, he said. The new will. My hands went completely numb. The heavy diluted haze instantly evaporated from my brain. Ice-cold adrenaline flooded my nervous system. I could actually feel my heartbeat throbbing in my throat. I just notarized them for you in your living room, Omari continued. But your signature looked really shaky. It didn't look like your usual signature. I just wanted to check on you. I stopped breathing. The heart monitor next to me immediately spiked its tempo. The math wasn't mathing. Location deception. I was sitting in a hospital bed on Kendall Drive. I was wearing a cheap cotton gown. I had been unconscious under general anesthesia for the last 3 hours, so who the hell was sitting on my custom white linen sofa? Who had looked Omari dead in the eye? Who had handed him my actual Florida driver's license? I gripped the plastic bed rail so hard my knuckles turned white. My jaw locked. I couldn't even form a word to respond to him. Because according to Omari, I had just signed away my entire $4 million estate to my mother-in-law, exactly 20 minutes ago. Omari, listen to me very carefully. My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. It sounded like I had swallowed glass. I was still gripping that plastic bed rail. My knuckles were completely white. I am at Baptist Hospital on Kendall Drive. I am in room 422. I have been here since 6 o'clock yesterday morning. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could hear Omari breathing heavily into the receiver. I tried to sit up. A sharp, blinding pain ripped through my fresh abdominal stitches. It felt like a hot knife twisting in my stomach. The dilaudid haze made the fluorescent lights above me spin. I collapsed back onto the stiff hospital pillows. My heart monitor started beeping frantically. The rhythmic alarm echoed off the sterile walls. Omari, whoever signed those papers 20 minutes ago wasn't me. I needed to check my purse right now. I reached across the bed for the rolling plastic tray table. My trembling fingers knocked over the plastic water pitcher. Ice water spilled all over my thin hospital gown. The freezing liquid soaked straight through to my skin. I didn't care. I grabbed my heavy leather tote bag. I unzipped the main compartment. I dug frantically through crumpled receipts and lipstick tubes. My black Prada wallet was sitting right there at the bottom. I pulled it out and flicked it open. The clear plastic driver's license slot was completely empty. My Florida ID was gone, just empty leather staring back at me. Location, location, deception. My brain started connecting the dots in real time. Let's rewind exactly 48 hours. Sunday afternoon. I was standing in my custom kitchen in Coral Gables. The afternoon sun was pouring through the French doors. The doorbell rang. It was my notoriously frosty mother-in-law, Beatrice. She had unexpectedly offered to drive over from Naples. She said she wanted to watch the house. She insisted on taking care of our 2 golden retrievers during my surgery. I should have checked her temperature right then. Beatrice hates dogs. She hates dog hair on her designer clothes even more. I watched her stand in my marble foyer. She was wearing a pale pink twin set. She had 3 matching leather suitcases beside her. She looked around the house like she was appraising it for an estate sale. Our living room indoor security camera caught the whole greeting. I checked the footage later. The timestamp said 2:15 p.m. You can see Langston kissing his mother's cheek. You can see me glaring from behind the kitchen island. Langston kept praising his mother's sudden warmth. She just wants to help, Kat, he told me. Help! Right. The next morning, I found a piece of personalized stationery on the granite counter. It was a handwritten note from Beatrice. She wrote a perfectly cursive list of helpful questions. I picked up the heavy cream paper. It smelled faintly of Chanel No. 5. I read the 3rd bullet point. Where is the master key to the jewelry safe? In parentheses, she had added 4 emergencies. What kind of emergency requires my diamond tennis bracelet? I walked into the home office and asked Langston about it. He was staring at his laptop screen. He snapped it shut the second I walked in. He got immediately defensive. She's just thinking ahead in case of a break-in while you're at the hospital. A break-in. The irony is physically painful. My hands were shaking as I remembered another conversation. It happened later that same Sunday night. Langston and I were sitting on the velvet sofa. He was drinking a glass of expensive scotch. He looked at my iPhone resting on the coffee table. He casually asked me a highly specific question. Hey, does your commercial real estate escrow account require dual-factor authentication? I turned and looked at him. Why do you ask? I said. He shrugged his shoulders. He didn't make eye contact. Just reading an article about cybersecurity. Making sure your business is safe. Safe. My husband was drowning in crypto debt. I didn't know the full terrifying extent of it yet, but the math wasn't mathing. Now, lying in this freezing hospital bed, the puzzle pieces slammed together. The missing driver's license from my wallet, the highly specific security questions on personalized stationery, the sudden loving mother-in-law visit from Naples. They didn't just plan a robbery. They planned a hostile takeover of my entire life, and they waited until I was literally unconscious under anesthesia to execute it. My own husband served me up on a silver platter, and his mother held the carving knife. I stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles of room 42012. The smell of hospital antiseptics suddenly made me violently nauseous. I should have known the devil doesn't wear Prada. She wears a pale pink cashmere twin set. Top at chapter 3. The line went completely dead. Not disconnected, just dead silent. I could hear Omari breathing heavily on the other end. My heart monitor was screaming in the background. Beep, beep, beep. My thin hospital gown was soaking wet with cold sweat. The smell of hospital antiseptic was suddenly making me intensely nauseous. The fresh stitches in my abdomen burned like hot glass. I gripped the plastic bed rail so hard my knuckles turned white. Omari! I rasped into the receiver. Send me a picture, he stammered. Ma'am, I don't think I'm legally allowed to. Send me a picture of what you just signed, I yelled. Searing pain ripped through my stomach muscles. I didn't care. Send it right now, Omari, or I'm calling the Coral Gables police. Silence again. Then a soft ding. I pulled the iPhone away from my ear. An iMessage from an unknown number? A photo was loading on the screen. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. The image finally resolved. It was a cell phone photo of a freshly printed last will and testament. The paper was bright white against Omari's black leather portfolio. My eyes zeroed in on the beneficiary section. There it was, my entire $4 million estate, completely revoked from my previous trust, reassigned to something called the Langston and Beatrice Family Trust. Other blinding violation washed over me. It was exactly 20:20 p.m. I sat up violently in the hospital bed. Searing pain ripped through my stomach muscles again. I reached over and tore the medical tape right off my IV line. A drop of blood welled up on my hand. I ignored it. I shoved the rolling plastic tray table out of my way. The plastic water pitcher rattled loudly. I zoomed in on the middle of the document. Article 4, Distribution of Assets. 100% to Beatrice. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, the signature. It was a clumsy, jagged attempt at my cursive. The loops were entirely wrong. The ink pressure was completely uneven. 5 years ago, I drafted my real will. I sat at the desk in my mahogany home office. I used my custom silver Mont Blanc pen. I signed my commercial real estate portfolio over to a trust for my nieces. I felt secure. I felt professional. Now, this cheat forgery was trying to erase my entire life's work. Langston thought he was a mastermind, but my husband is a complete tech dinosaur. He still texts his emails with 2 index fingers. He doesn't realize our entire house runs on a custom cloud sync server. Every camera, every smart lock, every motion sensor, it all logs to a hidden drive he can't access. He has no idea what he just walked into. Omari's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Mrs. Perez? Are you still there? You still have those forged papers, Omari? I asked. My voice dropped to a dangerous, icy whisper. Yes, ma'am, he squeaked. They're right here in my bag. Do not file them. Do not let them out of your sight. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows. I stared up at the acoustic ceiling tiles of room 422. My brain was spinning. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps making excuses? I was past that. I was in pure survival mode. The math just wasn't mathing. Location, deception. You can't just forge a signature in front of a mobile notary. State law requires them to log a valid ID. My black Prada wallet was sitting in the hospital lockbox. My actual Florida driver's license was missing from its slot. But there was one massive problem for Beatrice. A notary has to physically check ID. So who the hell sat in my living room and handed Omari my driver's license? Do not let that portfolio out of your sight, I told Omari. The line went dead silent. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. He sounded like a man who just realized he stepped on a landmine. I'm locking it in my trunk right now, he whispered. His voice was actually shaking. Good, I said, and dropped the phone on my lap. I looked down at my right hand. A thick drop of dark red blood was pooling on my knuckles. I had ripped my IV line completely sideways in my panic. The plastic tube was dangling over the metal bed rail. The heart monitor beside my bed started screaming. It was a high-pitched, piercing alarm. 2 nurses in blue scrubs burst into room 42012. The smell of harsh hospital antiseptic flooded the space. They started yelling at me to lie back down. One of them grabbed my bleeding hand. I yanked it away. I wiped the fresh blood directly onto my thin hospital gown. I didn't have time to bleed. My fingers were trembling, but I snatched my iPhone back up. I opened my custom smart home app. Langston thought our security system only recorded the exterior doors. He is a technological dinosaur. He didn't know about the hidden CloudSync server. I paid a private tech firm $5,000 to install it. The cameras are hidden inside the smoke detectors. They capture every single inch of the interior. I tapped the living room timeline. I swiped the little blue playback bar backward. The nurses were trying to push my bare shoulders down into the mattress. I shoved them away with my bloody hand. Don't touch me, I snapped. The video feed buffered for 2 agonizing seconds. Then the timestamp on the screen hit exactly 1:45 p.m. My breath hitched in my dry throat. There was my mother-in-law, Beatrice. She was strutting through my marble foyer like she owned the place. And she wasn't alone. She was leading another woman by the arm. I squinted at the glowing glass screen. The woman had dark hair styled into my exact signature blowout. Her face was half covered by an oversized vintage silk scarf. She was wearing massive black sunglasses indoors. But that wasn't what made my stomach violently heave. It was her shirt. She was wearing my emerald green silk blouse. Not just a similar shirt, my shirt. I bought that exact blouse exactly 1 year ago. I had just closed a $20 million commercial plaza deal in Brickell. I walked straight out of the closing and into the Ball Harbor boutiques. I dropped $1,200 on that silk just to feel triumphant. It has custom pearl buttons down the cuffs. It hangs in the back left corner of my master closet. And now, this cheap fraud was sweating in it. I watched the HD video feed from my hospital bed. Beatrice guided the imposter to my custom mahogany dining table. They sat down side by side on my velvet chairs. Beatrice pulled out a stack of crisp white paperwork. Location, deception. They were rehearsing the theft of my $4 million estate, right where I drink my morning espresso. The imposter kept fidgeting with the collar of my blouse. She looked incredibly nervous. Beatrice patted her hand, smiling that venomous, sugary smile. I wanted to reach through the phone screen and strangle them both. My fresh abdominal stitches felt like they were ripping open. A sharp, hot pain shot through my stomach. I didn't care. I zoomed in on the imposter's face. The resolution on these hidden cameras is absolute perfection. I needed to see who this pathetic thief was. I pressed my thumb against the glass to zoom in closer. Who did Beatrice hire for this hostile takeover? Some desperate local actress? A greedy friend from her Naples country club? The imposter reached up to adjust her sunglasses. And when she did, the camera caught a perfect high-definition shot of the ring on her right index finger. Topic Chapter 5. 2 nurses were actively trying to shove my shoulders back into the hospital mattress. "Ma'am, you need to lie down immediately," the taller one barked. I ignored her. My right hand was completely slick with blood. I had violently ripped out my IV line in my panic. The clear plastic tube was dangling off the edge of the metal bed rail. A steady drip of saline was pooling on the linoleum floor. The heart monitor next to my head was screaming in a rapid staccato. I didn't care about the noise. I didn't care about the fresh burning pain in my abdominal stitches. I was staring intently at the HD feed on my phone screen. I used my clean left hand to pinch and zoom on the video. I magnified the imposter's right index finger. There it was, a massive, square-cut Colombian emerald set in tarnished vintage gold. My breath hitched in my dry throat. That wasn't just any piece of jewelry. That was my grandmother's custom emerald ring. It legally belongs in the velvet tray of my master bedroom jewelry safe. And there is only one person in Coral Gables trashy enough to wear it. Margot, Langston's perpetually unemployed, deeply envious sister. The math was finally mathing. Beatrice didn't hire a random stranger off the street. She got the $4 million real estate fraud strictly in the family. Margot had the dark blowout. Margot had the oversized vintage sunglasses. And Margot was sitting on my velvet sofa, signing away my entire life. Suddenly, my iPhone screen violently shifted. The paused security footage of Margot vanished. An incoming call screen took over the bright display. The contact name read, Langston. I stared at the glowing white letters. It made me want to vomit straight onto the rolling plastic tray. The taller nurse grabbed my bleeding hand with a thick gauze pad. She applied hard, stinging pressure to the torn vein. I held up my left index finger right in her face. It was a universal signal to shut up. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the sterile hospital air. I let my facial muscles go completely slack. I instantly transformed from a furious commercial broker into a helpless housewife. I swiped the green accept button. "Hello?" I whispered. I forced my voice to sound thick, confused, and heavily medicated. "Hey, baby," Langston cooed through the tiny phone speaker. His tone was dripping with this overly sweet, sickeningly patronizing syrup. My stomach instantly dropped to the floor. I knew that exact high-pitched, gentle voice. It was the exact same voice he used 3 years ago. The time he conveniently forgot to pay the property taxes on our condo. "Are you lucid yet, sweetheart?" he asked. Just waking up," I slurred into the receiver. I squeezed my eyes shut against the harsh fluorescent ceiling lights. I could smell the sharp, chemical scent of hospital antiseptic. Good, he said smoothly. I could hear the relief washing over his words. He was probably standing in my custom kitchen right now. He was probably staring at the very paperwork his mother just forged. Listen, don't worry about a single thing at home. I kept my breathing slow and artificially heavy. Mama's over here handling some mundane house paperwork, he continued. Mundane house paperwork. That is a hell of a way to describe a hostile estate takeover. Just some insurance updates so you don't have to stress, he lied effortlessly. He was drowning in crypto debt. He thought he had just found his permanent financial lifeline. He was digging his own grave with a custom silver spoon. Thank you, honey, I breathed into the microphone. You're so good to me. The metallic taste of pure bile coated the back of my tongue. Get some rest, babe, he said softly. Let the medicine do its work. I waited for the soft electronic click of him hanging up. The call ended. The screen went black for a fraction of a second. The nurse was still pressing the bloody gauze into my right hand. I looked up at her. My groggy housewife act vanished in a millisecond. Tape it up and leave, I ordered her sharply. She blinked at me, completely stunned by the sudden tone shift. Location, deception? Langston thought I was heavily sedated and safely out of the way. He told me to get some rest and let the medicine work. Oh, I was gonna do some work, all right. Starting with zooming back in on that security footage. The young nurse actually took a physical step back from my bed. My voice didn't sound like a helpless surgical patient anymore. It sounded like a commercial landlord holding a final eviction notice. She grabbed a roll of thick medical tape from the plastic rolling tray. Her hands were visibly trembling. A bright drop of my blood had already stained the crisp white hospital sheets. She wrapped the torn IV site on my right hand. Tighten it, I snapped. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed loudly overhead. She finished the taping, nodded nervously, and practically ran out of the room. The heavy wind door clicked shut. I was finally alone in room 412. The air smelled intensely of bleach and cheap institutional soap. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows. I lifted my iPhone back up with my freshly taped hand. My thumb tapped the glass screen. I opened the custom cloud server app. I pulled up the dining room camera feed. The hidden lens is perfectly concealed inside a fake smoke detector. The timestamp in the bottom corner read 1050 p.m. Sunday afternoon. I pinched the screen to zoom in on the imposter. The woman was sitting at my custom mahogany dining table. She was wearing my $1,200 emerald green silk blouse. I zoomed in closer on her right hand. The resolution on those hidden lenses is terrifyingly crisp. There it was, resting flat on the polished wood. A massive custom Colombian emerald ring set in heavy, tarnished vintage gold. My grandmother's ring. It's a flawless 3-carat stone. I keep it locked in a velvet tray inside my master bedroom safe. It never sees the light of day. 2 days ago, Beatrice had stood in my bedroom. She had asked for the master key to that exact jewelry safe. She claimed she wanted to secure my valuables while I was under anesthesia. The math was finally mathing. Location, deception. Beatrice hadn't secured my jewelry at all. She had raided the safe to accessorize her little fraud puppet. I watched the silent video play on my phone. The imposter reached across the table for a glass of water. She pulled down the vintage silk scarf from her face. She took a long sip. As she tilted her head back, the massive black sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose. I hit pause immediately. My heart monitors started beeping in a rapid, frantic rhythm. I stared at the frozen image on my glowing screen. I knew that sharp, over-contoured jawline. I recognized that terrible slouching posture and the hair. It was dyed a harsh, flat jet black. It was a desperate amateur attempt to match my natural color. It was Margot, Langston's perpetually unemployed sister. I felt a cold sweat break out under my thin hospital gown. For 10 years, Margot had treated my closet like a free luxury boutique. She would constantly try on my clothes at family gatherings. She would slip my diamond tennis bracelets onto her wrists after a few drinks. She used to hold up my designer bags and smirk at me. She would say, "This looks better on me anyway, Kat." I always thought it was just pathetic sibling jealousy. I was wrong. It was an audition. She had been rehearsing to steal my life for a decade. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps making excuses? I didn't have excuses anymore. I had 4K video evidence. My thumb hovered over the pause video. A terrifying thought hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Omari had stamped the paperwork. His official Florida notary seal was currently sitting on that forged will. He had locked it in his black leather portfolio. It was in the trunk of his car. Was it legally binding right now? If a state commission notary signs off, the courts assume the document is authentic. Unwinding a fraudulent trust in Miami could take years of expensive litigation. Years I absolutely did not have. Langston was drowning in crypto debt right now. He and Beatrice could drain my $4 million estate by Friday. They could wire the escrow money to an offshore account before my abdominal stitches even healed. I stared at Margot's smug, frozen face on my phone screen. I gripped the cold metal bed rail with my left hand. The plastic hospital ID bracelet dug sharply into my wrist. My mother-in-law planned it. My husband covered for it, and my sister-in-law wore my clothes to execute it. It was a family affair. I didn't even wait for the stunned nurse to finish taping my bleeding hand. My left thumb was already flying across my cracked iPhone screen. I opened my text thread with Amari. My fingers were trembling so violently I kept hitting the wrong keys. The text said, "Omari, that wasn't me. It was an imposter." I typed a second message. "Do not file those papers. Destroy the stamp." I hit send. The fluorescent lights in room 42012 buzzed loudly above my head. My fresh abdominal stitches screamed in protest as I sat up straighter. I didn't care about the pain. 3 seconds later, my phone vibrated in my sweaty palm. It was Omari calling back. I swiped the green button and pressed the speaker right to my ear. He whispered, "Catalina." "I know." His voice was shaking. He said, "I knew the second she handed me the ID." I closed my eyes, letting my heavy head fall back against the stiff hospital pillows. I asked him how he knew. He said, "The Florida driver's license she gave me was expired by 3 years. He added, "And the signature she practiced was an absolute joke." I should have known Omari wouldn't miss a glaring detail like that. 3 years ago, we sat together in a cramped brickle-board room. He meticulously checked every single page of a 200-page commercial lease. He caught a tiny typo in the escrow clause that saved me $50,000. The man treats his notary logbook like a sacred religious text. I asked, "So you didn't stamp the new will?" My heart was hammering wildly against my ribs. Omari said, "No, I refuse to complete the notarization." A massive wave of relief washed over my freezing skin. He added, "But Catalina, there's a serious problem." The frantic tone of his voice made my stomach completely drop. He said, "When I told them I couldn't notarize it, your mother-in-law snapped." Beatrice physically snatched the document right out of my hands. I gripped the cold metal bed rail. I asked, "She took the physical paper?" He said, "She grabbed it off the glass coffee table and ordered me out." He told me he just emailed his official digital log as proof. I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened my Gmail app. There it was at the top of my inbox, an email from Omari's business account. I clicked the attached image file. It was a screenshot of his official digital notary log. The red text glared at me in bold all caps, refused and flage. Underneath, his meticulous notes spelled out the failed transaction. The notes read, "Signer ID expired. Signature mismatch. Document seized by third party. Location, deception." Beatrice actually thought she could bully a seasoned professional into committing a felony. She clearly underestimated my team. I told him I'm looking at the driveway camera right now. I toggled back to the custom cloud server app. I pulled up the outdoor video feed from exactly 2:10 p.m. There was Omari on the glowing screen. He was power walking down my paver driveway toward his silver Honda. He kept glancing nervously over his shoulder at my mahogany front door. He looked exactly like a man escaping an active hostage situation. I said, "Omari, you did the right thing. I am so sorry my psycho family dragged you into this." We ended the call. I let out a long, incredibly shaky breath. The suffocating smell of hospital antiseptic suddenly didn't bother me as much. The forged will wasn't notarized. Without that official state seal, it was just a worthless stack of crisp white paper. It held absolutely zero legal weight in the state of Florida. They couldn't touch my $4 million estate. They couldn't legally steal the Coral Gables house. The math wasn't mathing for Beatrice and Langston, and they knew it. Their little hostile takeover had completely stalled out in my living room. You know that feeling when you dodge a massive bullet and your entire body just goes limp? That was me sinking deep into that terrible plastic hospital mattress. I wiped a cold bead of sweat from my forehead with my freshly taped hand. Omari didn't stamp it. Thank God. I thought the nightmare was over, until my bank app sent me a push notification that made my blood run cold. Top it Chapter 8. The red banner flashed across my cracked iPhone screen. Chase Bank fraud alert. Did you authorize a wire transfer of $50,000? I stopped breathing. My thumb hovered over the glass screen. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone onto the plastic rolling tray. I tapped the notification and the Chase app opened. There it was in black and white. A pending wire transfer for $50,000. The destination was a known offshore crypto exchange. The timestamp was 1:00 p.m. exact, right when I was supposed to be dead to the world under heavy anesthesia. The math was finally mathing. Location, deception. My mind snapped back to 2 days ago. We were in the custom kitchen. Langston was casually leaning against the marble island. He was wearing his expensive golf polo. He was sipping a glass of expensive scotch. He looked over at me with that stupid, boyish smile. He said, "Babe, isn't it annoying to log into your business escrow account?" I remember wiping down the granite countertops. I asked him what he meant. He took another sip of his drink. He said, "All that dual-factor authentication on your phone seems like overkill." I had brushed it off at the time. I told myself I was overthinking his interest in my finances. I wasn't. It wasn't a casual question about banking security. It was hostile reconnaissance. He knew I wouldn't have my phone in the operating room. He assumed the wire transfer would just bypass my approval. He timed it perfectly to steal 50 grand while I was unconscious. Or so he thought. I looked at the clear plastic tube running into my left arm. I didn't even hesitate. I ripped the thick medical tape right off my skin. It burned like hell. I pulled the IV needle straight out of my vein. A drop of dark blood spilled onto the crisp, white hospital sheets. I didn't care. The nurse rushed back into room 42012. She saw the blood and started yelling about hospital protocols. I ignored her. I swung my legs over the cold metal bed rail. My bare feet hit the freezing linoleum floor. I grabbed my heavy leather tote bag from the plastic chair. I pulled my beige trench coat directly over my thin hospital gown. I looked the nurse dead in the eye. I said, "Print the against medical advice forms right now." She blinked at me, completely stunned. She handed me the clipboard with shaking hands. I signed the AMA release using my custom silver Mont Blanc pen. I didn't even read the liability clause. I just wanted out. I walked straight out of room 412. I took the elevator down to the main floor. I marched through the hospital lobby on Kendall Drive. The smell of cheap coffee and harsh floor wax hit my nose. My Uber Black pulled up to the curb at exactly 3:15 p.m. I climbed into the back seat. The black leather was freezing against my bare legs. I leaned my head against the tinted window. I was pale and sweating through my hospital gown. I had to clutch my stomach to protect my fresh abdominal stitches. Every time the SUV hit a bump, sharp pain shot through my torso, but I wasn't focused on the pain anymore. I was burning with pure, unadulterated fury. The driver pulled out onto the busy Miami street. I opened the Chase app again. I clicked into the blocked transaction details. I needed to see the digital footprint. Langston is a desperate fraudster, but he's also an idiot. He didn't use a VPN. He didn't mask his location. The bank logged the exact IP address of the device that requested the money. I stared at the string of numbers glowing on my screen. My heart started pounding in my throat. I recognized those numbers instantly. I set up our custom cloud server myself. I know every device on our network. The withdrawal was flagged. But the IP address that requested it, it was coming from inside my own house. The Uber Black dropped me 2 blocks from my own driveway. I didn't want the driver pulling up to the house. The Coral Gables pavement was burning my bare feet. I was wearing nothing but a beige trench coat over a thin hospital gown. My right hand was throbbing. The thick medical tape over my torn IV site was soaking through with fresh blood. Every single step sent a white-hot spike of pain through my abdominal stitches. I felt like I was being sawed in half. I limped toward the side garage entrance. The afternoon sun was blinding. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely punch in the keypad code. 5821. The heavy wooden door clicked open. I slipped inside the dark garage. It smelled like expensive motor oil and Langston's leather golf bag. I leaned against the cold hood of my Porsche just to catch my breath. The metal cooled my sweating face. I felt like a trespasser in my own $4 million home. I eased the interior fire door open. It creaked, just a fraction. I froze. Nothing happened. The marble foyer floor felt like ice against my bare toes. The house was dead quiet. Then the sharp, distinct clink of crystal glasses. The sound was coming from my custom kitchen. I crept down the hallway, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall. My hospital gown rustled under the trench coat. My stitches felt like they were ripping open with every movement. I ignored the burning pain. I had to see it with my own eyes. I slipped into the walk-in pantry and gently pulled the louvered door shut. The small space smelled like imported saffron and dried eucalyptus. I pressed my face against the wooden slats of the door. I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the kitchen island. There they were, Langston and Beatrice. They were sitting on my velvet bar stools, laughing. Langston was pouring 2 massive shots of tequila. I recognized the bottle instantly. It was my reserve Casamigos. I bought that exact bottle 6 months ago. I bought it to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. I remember the exact Ball Harbor boutique where I picked it up. Now he was drinking it with his mother to celebrate my financial execution. I knew the hidden camera and the fake smoke detector above them was rolling. The timestamp on my cloud server app would read exactly 3:45 p.m. I was watching the death of my marriage in real time. I shifted my weight trying to see the marble countertop. The unnotarized forged will was sitting right next to the tequila bottle. It was a neat stack of crisp white paperwork. Beatrice had my custom silver Mont Blanc pen in her hand. She was practicing a signature on a spare piece of paper. My signature. My chest went completely hollow. You know that feeling when your gut drops so fast you can't even breathe? My hands went numb. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was an autopsy of the last 10 years of my life. I watched Langston raise his crystal glass. He clinked it against his mother's glass. He actually smiled. It was that boyish, charming smile I used to fall for. The same smile he used to hide his massive crypto debt. I tasted copper in my mouth. I was biting my own lip so hard it was bleeding. Beatrice took a delicate sip of the tequila. She adjusted the pale pink cashmere twins that she was wearing. She looked down at the forged will. She traced a line on the paper with her perfectly manicured fingernail. "The lips on the sea are tricky," she murmured. I gripped the wooden shelf in the pantry. A heavy bag of organic flour dug into my palm. My taped hand was throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I wanted to push the louvered door open. I wanted to march out there in my bloody hospital gown. I wanted to flip that marble island upside down. I took a shallow breath. The stitches in my stomach pulled tight. I braced my hand against the doorframe. I was ready to burst out and scream. But then Langston opened his mouth, and what he said next glued my feet to the floor. Topic Chapter 10. I stood frozen in the dark of my own walk-in pantry. My bare feet were freezing against the cold marble floor. I was clutching a heavy bag of organic flour like a shield. My right hand throbbed violently under the thick medical tape. The fresh abdominal stitches from my surgery felt like hot glass pulling at my skin. I was wearing nothing but a thin hospital gown and a beige trench coat. The pantry smelled faintly of dried lavender and imported olive oil, but the physical pain was nothing compared to what Langston said next. His voice drifted through the narrow crack in the pantry door. It didn't sound like my polished country club husband. It sounded like a man drowning in a dark ocean. He said, "Mom, the SEC subpoenaed the firm's hard drives this morning." I stopped breathing. The heavy bag of flour slipped a fraction of an inch. He continued, "The crypto exchange collapsed on Friday. The money is gone." Beatrice's voice was eerily calm. She asked him exactly how much he had lost. Langston's voice cracked. $2 million, all client funds. My knees actually buckled. I leaned my shoulder hard against the wooden pantry shelves. A jar of marinara sauce rattled slightly against the wood. $2 million. He hadn't just made a bad investment. He was running a crypto pump and dump scheme through his boutique firm. He was a fraud. I pulled my cracked iPhone from my trench coat pocket. My taped fingers fumbled with the glass screen. The phone cast a harsh blue glow in the dark pantry. I opened Safari and typed his firm's name into Google. A Bloomberg article from 2 days ago popped up immediately. The headline read, "Unnamed Miami consulting firm under SEC investigation for crypto fraud." The math was suddenly mathing. Location, location, deception. My mind flashed back to the past 3 months. I remembered waking up at 3 a.m. to an empty bed. I would walk downstairs and find Langston pacing the pool deck. He would be smoking cheap cigars in the dark. He was always aggressively typing on his phone. He told me he was just stressed about a difficult commercial lease. He wasn't stressed about real estate. He was trying to cover up a massive federal crime. I switched my phone back to the live kitchen security feed. The timestamp in the corner read exactly 3:50 p.m. Langston was pacing in front of my custom marble island. He ran his hands over his face. He looked genuinely terrified. He looked at Beatrice and said, "If I don't wire that escrow money, I'm going to federal prison." Federal prison. That was the real motive. This wasn't just a greedy mother-in-law trying to steal my estate. This was a desperate husband trying to buy his way out. He needed my $4 million to replace the money he stole. Through the cracked door, I heard the distinct clinking of crystal glasses. Beatrice was pouring him another glass of my expensive scotch. I watched her on my glowing screen. She reached out and patted his shaking hand. She said, "Don't you worry, darling. Catalina owes you this." She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. She added, 10 years of dealing with that woman's ego? Consider this your severance package. A strange thing happens when your heart finally breaks completely. It stops hurting. I leaned my head back against the cool plaster wall. The sadness just evaporated into the heavy pantry air. My chest felt hollow. I stared at Langston's pathetic, panicked face on my screen. He wasn't the victim of a domineering mother. He was the mastermind of my attempted financial murder. I gripped the edges of my phone so hard, my knuckles popped. He was willing to destroy my entire life to save his own. I looked down at my taped, bleeding hand. I looked at the heavy bag of flour still in my arms. I gently set the bag down on the cold marble floor. I didn't need a shield anymore. I needed a weapon. I needed to walk out there and look them dead in the eye, but I needed to be smart about the transaction. I had to secure that escrow account before they realized I was awake. I took a deep, agonizing breath. I ignored the stabbing pain in my stomach. I reached out and gripped the cold brass handle of the pantry door. He wasn't a weak man manipulated by his mother. He was a cornered rat. And it was time to introduce the rat to the exterminator. Topic Chapter 11. I stood in the darkness of my own walk-in pantry. My right hand gripped the cold brass handle of the door. The metal was freezing against my palm. My left hand held my cracked iPhone. Before I blew up their entire world, I had to secure my assets. I opened the Chase app. My thumb hovered over the two-factor authentication settings. Langston needed that escrow money to pay back his stolen crypto funds. He needed my $4 million to avoid federal prison. Not today, sweetheart. I deleted his trusted device from the security profile. I changed the primary recovery number to my burner phone. Then I locked the entire escrow account down with a biometric freeze. The screen flashed green. Account secured. The money was officially untouchable. I shoved the phone into the pocket of my beige trench coat. My body was practically vibrating with adrenaline, or maybe it was just massive blood loss. My bare feet were numb against the cold pantry tile. The thick medical tape on my right hand was completely soaked through. Fresh blood was dripping onto a $20 bag of organic flour. My abdominal stitches were screaming. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. I didn't care. I pushed the heavy pantry door open. The hinges didn't make a sound. I stepped out into the blinding light of my custom kitchen. It was exactly 3:55 p.m. I know because the microwave clock was glaring right at me, I must have looked like an actual ghost. I was pale as a sheet. I was wearing a blood-stained hospital gown under a designer trench coat. Langston was standing by the marble island. He was holding a crystal glass of reserve Casamigos tequila. He turned around and saw me. The color completely drained from his face. His jaw actually unhinged. His fingers went slack. The crystal glass slipped right out of his hand. It hit the custom quartz floor and shattered into 100 pieces. The sound echoed off the acoustic ceiling tiles. Expensive scotch and tequila splashed across the pristine white grout. Beatrice whipped her head around. She let out a high-pitched, genuine shriek. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The hidden smoke detector camera was capturing every single second of this. I wanted to frame the footage and hang it in the Louvre. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I took a step forward. A sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. I kept my face completely blank. I walked slowly across the kitchen. My bare feet crunched over the shattered crystal. I didn't even flinch. I reached the custom marble island. There it was. The unnotarized forged will was sitting right next to my silver Montblanc pen. I picked up the crisp white paperwork. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I stared down at the fake signature. It looked even more pathetic up close. The loops were entirely wrong. The ink pressure was completely uneven. "You forgot to cross the T, Beatrice," I said. My voice sounded like dry gravel. Langston was hyperventilating. He was practically backing up into the stainless steel refrigerator. But Beatrice is a different breed of predator. It took her exactly 4 seconds to recover. She smoothed down her pale pink cashmere twin set. She plastered on a look of deep maternal concern. "Catalina, darling," she cooed. "What on earth are you doing out of bed?" I just stared at her. She took a step toward me. "You're heavily medicated, sweetheart. The hospital called us. They said you wandered off in the dilaudid haze." I squeezed the forged will in my hand. The paper crumpled loudly in the silent kitchen. This was her classic move. Gaslighting was Beatrice's favorite sport. For 10 years, she had played this exact game. I would confront her about a passive-aggressive insult. She would smile. She would tell me I had misremembered the conversation. I would catch her snooping in my home office. She would claim she was just looking for a paperclip. She was trying to do it again. Right here, right now, with the forged will literally in my bleeding hand. "You are hallucinating, Catalina," she said softly. "You need to sit down before you hurt yourself." Langston finally found his voice. "Cat, please," he stammered. "Mom is right." "You're confused. Let me call the doctor." I looked at my pathetic husband. I looked at his scheming mother. The math wasn't mathing for them anymore. Location, deception. They really thought they could spin this. They thought they could convince me I was crazy. Beatrice told me I was crazy, that I was having a drug-induced psychotic break, and right on cue, the front door opened. The front door swung open. It hit the marble foyer wall with a heavy, expensive thud. High heels clicked rapidly across the custom quartz floor. "God, it is absolutely suffocating out there," a voice whined. Margot strutted right into the kitchen. She was aggressively fanning herself with a glossy Vogue magazine. She was wearing my clothes. Specifically, my $1,200 emerald green silk blouse. She even had my oversized vintage Chanel sunglasses pushed up into her dark blowout. She didn't even notice me standing there at first. She was too busy complaining about the terrible Miami traffic on US 1. Then she turned toward the custom marble island. She froze completely. The magazine slipped right out of her hand. It slapped loudly against the hard floor. I just stood there. I didn't move an inch. My bare feet were still planted firmly on the shattered crystal glass. The crumpled forged will was crushed in my bleeding, taped-up right hand. The pain from my fresh abdominal stitches was absolutely blinding. Margot slowly lowered my Chanel sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. Her jaw literally dropped open. Beatrice tried to intervene. "Margot, don't say a..." I cut her off. I reached deep into the pocket of my beige trench coat. I pulled out my iPhone with my left hand. I unlocked the screen, opened the camera app, and hit the red record button. I decided to treat them exactly like the pathetic criminals they were. I started narrating the room like a cheap true crime documentary. "Welcome to Coral Gables," I said directly into the microphone. I panned the camera slowly across the expensive kitchen. It is exactly 3:55 p.m. on a Tuesday. I pointed the lens straight at Beatrice. She was nervously clutching her pale pink cashmere twin set. Here we have the mother-in-law caught red-handed attempting to forge a legal document. I swung the camera over to Margot. She instinctively threw her hands up to hide her face. And here is the bargain bin imposter, wearing my stolen clothes and my stolen identity. Finally, I lifted the crumpled, unnotarized will right up to the lens. "And this is the $4 million fraud." I turned the camera toward my husband. "Say hi to SEC, Langston." That was the absolute wrong thing to say. Langston's face turned a terrifying, mottled shade of purple. The stammering, pathetic coward completely vanished. I had seen that exact look on his face exactly once before. It was 2 years ago. He had just lost a massive commercial client in Brickell. I watched him march out to our pool deck. He hurled his custom titanium golf club straight into the deep end. It was a scary, unhinged temper tantrum, but this was entirely different. This was pure, unfiltered survival instinct. Langston lunged across the massive marble island. He moved faster than I thought possible. He didn't even care about the broken glass covering the floor. He grabbed my left wrist with brutal bruising force. I gasped loudly in pain. My bleeding right hand slammed hard against the cold quartz countertop. He ripped the iPhone straight out of my fingers. "Langston, stop it!" Beatrice shrieked from the corner. He didn't listen to his mother. He raised my phone high above his head. He brought it down onto the sharp stone edge of the kitchen island with terrifying violence. The sound of the phone shattering was deafening. It echoed off the high acoustic ceiling. A massive spike of genuine physical fear shot right through my chest. My knees physically buckled under my weight. He hit it against the stone again and again. Pieces of glass and metal exploded across the counter. The ruined device bounced off the quartz and hit the floor. I stared down at the wreckage. The cracked iPhone screen was completely dead. The expensive camera lens was utterly shattered. It was lying in pieces on the kitchen floor. The red digital numbers on the stainless steel microwave clock read exactly 4 p.m. Langston stood there panting heavily. He thought he had just destroyed the only evidence of their crime. He was wrong. The hidden smoke detector camera directly above the island was still recording. It was capturing every single violent second. It captured his furious face. It captured the physical assault. But that footage didn't help me right now. I was completely alone in a room with 3 desperate felons. I was bleeding, barefoot, and recovering from major surgery. The phone was dead. And as Langston stepped toward me, his eyes dark and desperate, I realized just how far a man facing federal prison would go. Topic: Chapter 13. Langston took another step toward me. His heavy Prada loafers crunched down on the shattered crystal glass. I didn't back up. I couldn't. My bare feet were already bleeding on the custom quartz floor. My right hand was dripping blood from the torn IV site. My left wrist throbbed with a deep, ugly bruise. The fresh stitches in my abdomen burned like hot iron. I was wearing nothing but a beige trench coat over a blood-stained hospital gown. I looked like a victim, but I wasn't playing that role today. Langston looked down at the floor. He kicked my smashed iPhone with the toe of his shoe. The cracked device slid all the way under the custom marble island. It hit the baseboards with a dull thud. Gone. Just like that. No phone. No calling 911. No rescue. He looked back up at me. His dark eyes were completely dead. The man I married was gone. This was just a cornered animal facing federal prison. "It's 3 against 1. Cat," he whispered. "You have absolutely no proof." I was still clutching the unnotarized forged will in my left hand. My knuckles were white. Langston reached out and grabbed the top of the crisp white paperwork. He ripped the crumpled document right out of my grip. I gasped as the sharp edge sliced a paper cut across my thumb. He smoothed out the wrinkled pages against the cold quartz countertop. He tapped his index finger right on the blank notary section. Omari's official Florida notary seal was missing. I thought that was my shield. I was wrong. "I don't need the mobile notary," Langston said softly. "I have a golf buddy." My stomach dropped to the floor. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt freezing cold. I remembered a humid Saturday last summer out on our pool deck. Langston was drinking expensive scotch with a local probate judge. The man had a sleazy spray tan and a heavy gold Rolex. He sat in my teak patio chair, laughing loudly. He was bragging about making his friend's felony DUI charges magically disappear. Location, corruption. The stainless steel microwave clock behind Langston read exactly 4:05 p.m. He stepped even closer. I could smell the stale coffee and nervous sweat on his breath. He loomed right over me, trapping me against the marble island. He pointed the crumpled legal document directly at my chest. Up on the ceiling, the fake smoke detector was capturing every single second of this. The hidden camera lens was recording his exact posture. "Judge Miller will push this right through probate," Langston told me. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "He owes me a massive favor." Langston tilted his head. He slowly looked up and down my frail, trembling body. "He will expedite the paperwork," Langston continued. especially if my beloved wife tragically succumbs to post-surgical complications at home. The kitchen went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I looked over at my mother-in-law. Beatrice was sitting perfectly straight on a velvet bar stool. She didn't gasp. She didn't object. She actually nodded in agreement. The devil wears a pale pink cashmere twin set. Margot was standing by the stainless steel refrigerator. She looked physically sick. Her face was chalky white behind those oversized vintage Chanel sunglasses. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her mouth shut. Blood is thicker than water, and greed is thicker than both. My hands went completely numb. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The math was finally mathing. The massive crypto debt. The SEC investigation. The missing $2 million of client funds. He didn't just want my $4 million estate. He needed me dead to actually claim it. My knees started to buckle under my own weight. The agonizing pain in my abdomen flared up again. He was going to let me die. Or worse, he was going to help me along. So I gave him exactly what he wanted. Topic. Chapter 14. I let my eyes roll back into my skull. I clutched my burning abdomen and let my knees give out. My bare, bleeding feet slid against the bloody quartz floor. I went down hard, but not recklessly. 35 years ago, I was in my high school drama club. I spent an entire semester practicing stage falls on a wooden stage. You'll learn how to collapse without breaking your neck. Or, in my case, without ripping open fresh surgical stitches. I twisted my hip at the last second. I landed on my left side, right in the shattered crystal. A jagged piece of glass bit into my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I went completely limp. I let my jaw hang open. Margot let out a blood-curdling scream from the hallway. "Oh my God, she's dead." Langston dropped to his knees beside me. The floorboards groaned under his weight. I could feel his heavy, panicked breathing on my face. He still had the crumpled forged will clutched in his fist. The paper crinkled as he grabbed my shoulder. "Shut up, Margot," Beatrice snapped. Her voice was pure ice. There was zero panic in her tone. Hands grabbed my armpits. Langston's sweaty palms dug into my ruined silk shirt. They dragged my limp body out of the kitchen. My bleeding heels left a thick red trail across the custom marble floor. The friction burned my skin. We entered the living room. They hoisted me onto the velvet sofa. My sliced left thumb throbbed in time with my racing heartbeat. My destroyed iPhone was still back in the kitchen. I had absolutely no way to call for help. I kept my eyelids parted just a fraction of a millimeter. Through my lashes, the world was a blurry slit of light. I saw Langston pull out his phone. His hands were shaking violently. "I'm calling 911, he stammered. "This has gone too far." "We can't do this." Beatrice grabbed his wrist. Her manicured nails dug viciously into his skin. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." My blood ran completely cold. The smell of her Chanel No. 5 perfume was suddenly suffocating. It smelled like a funeral parlor. "What are you talking about?" Langston choked out. His voice cracked like a terrified teenager. "She had complications from surgery," Beatrice said smoothly. "She collapsed. We panicked. It happens every day." "We need an ambulance," Margot sobbed from the doorway. I could hear her pacing on the hardwood. "We will call one," Beatrice replied. "In exactly 10 minutes." 10 minutes. I felt the cold leather of the sofa against my cheek. She was going to let me bleed out. She was going to let me die. Right here in my own house. I focused my blurry vision on Langston's hands. His phone screen was lit up brightly. The keypad was open. He had already typed the 9 and the 1. His thumb hovered right over the final one. He didn't press it. The coward just stood there. Instead, he slowly lowered the phone. He raised his left arm. He checked his heavy gold Rolex. It was exactly 4:12 p.m. I knew this because the living room security camera was recording everything. That little black lens was hidden right above the fireplace mantle. It was capturing every single second of my attempted murder. Location, deception. The math wasn't mathing for them anymore. They needed me gone to cash out. My right hand was still actively bleeding onto the expensive velvet cushions. The pain in my abdomen was blinding, a hot iron pressing into my organs. I focused on taking shallow, invisible breaths. I had to stay perfectly still. 10 minutes, Langston repeated softly. His voice was hollow. He had finally crossed the line. Beatrice reached over and smoothed his hair. She patted his cheek like he was a good little boy who just won a spelling bee. It made me want to vomit. I lay there like a corpse. I listened to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. I couldn't move. I couldn't fight back. They stood over me watching the clock, waiting for my heart to stop. But they weren't the only ones watching the clock. I lay perfectly still on my green velvet sofa. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked like a heavy metal metronome. Exactly 3 agonizing minutes had passed since my collapse. The microwave clock in the kitchen read exactly 4:12 p.m. Every single nerve in my body was absolutely screaming. I had a jagged piece of crystal glass embedded deep in my left shoulder. My bare heels were bleeding onto the pale silk cushions. The fresh surgical stitches in my abdomen felt like burning barbed wire. Every shallow breath I took was a calculated risk. I had to look like I was already dead. Langston was pacing across the custom quartz floor, his Prada loafers making wet, sticking sounds in my blood. Beatrice stood by the fireplace clutching my forged will, her perfume mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Margot sobbed in the corner. Beatrice whispered, "Just give it 7 more minutes. Let her heart stop completely." I kept my eyes shut, slowing my breathing. The math in my head was keeping me conscious. The grandfather clock chimed 4:15 p.m. Suddenly, the brass doorbell echoed through the foyer. Langston jumped, slamming his knee into the coffee table. Beatrice hissed, "Hide her," but it was too late. Langston opened the door, only to be shoved backward by the force of the entry. 2 police officers stepped onto the marble, flanked by Omari, the mobile notary. I had forwarded the cloud footage to him earlier, and he had been watching the live feed. As the officers moved in, I sat up on the sofa, ignoring the agony of my stitches. Beatrice turned, her jaw dropping in shock. I gave her the most vicious smile of my life. The cavalry had arrived, and the game was over. The heavy mahogany front door didn't just open, it practically exploded off its brass hinges. 3 Coral Gables police officers flooded my living room. Their heavy boots pounded against my custom quartz floor. Langston froze mid-stride. His custom Prada loafers were currently soaked in my blood. Beatrice was still clutching the unnotarized forged will. Her manicured fingers were trembling so hard the paper rattled. Margot just started weeping into her stolen vintage silk scarf. I sat up straight on the green velvet sofa. Searing pain ripped through my abdomen. My surgical stitches were definitely torn. A jagged piece of crystal glass was still lodged in my left shoulder. Warm blood dripped down my arm onto the pale silk cushions. I didn't care. I gave my mother-in-law a vicious, bloody smile. "Drop the paper, ma'am," the lead officer barked. His hand rested firmly on his duty belt. Beatrice actually tried to gaslight the police. She smoothed the front of her pale pink cashmere twin set. She put on her best Coral Gables matriarch voice. "Officers, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is just confused from her surgery." The officer didn't even blink. He unclipped his radio from his shoulder. "We have the 3 suspects. Send the paramedics in for the homeowner." Langston stared at the shattered pieces of my iPhone on the floor. He looked at the cops. Then he looked at me. His face was the color of wet cement. He couldn't compute how they got here. His little brain was short-circuiting. Let me take you back exactly 55 minutes. It was 3:20 p.m. I was sitting in the back of an Uber Black. We were speeding down US 1 toward my house. I was bleeding through my thin hospital gown. Every bump in the road felt like a knife in my gut, but my right hand was perfectly functional. I had opened my custom smart home app. I downloaded the high-def interior footage of Margot wearing my emerald ring. I downloaded the audio files of Beatrice coaching her in the dining room. I grabbed a screenshot of the blocked $50,000 Chase Bank wire transfer. The IP address clearly showed it came from my own house. I attached all 3 files to a new email. I typed in Omari's email address. The subject line was very specific. "Evidence of identity theft and wire fraud. Call PD." I hit send with a vicious tap of my thumb. The screen flashed a green checkmark. Omari didn't just call them. He walked straight into the Coral Gables police precinct. He showed the desk sergeant the high-definition footage of my attempted murder. Langston thought smashing my phone in the kitchen would destroy the evidence. The math wasn't mathing. He forgot about the custom cloud server. 4 years ago, I paid 20 grand to hardwire this entire house. I remember standing in the mahogany home office. Langston was sipping expensive scotch and complaining. He said the cloud sync cameras were too complicated. He flat out refused to download the app. He called himself a proud tech dinosaur. Well, the dinosaur was about to go extinct. I looked up at the ceiling above the fireplace mantle. The fake smoke detector lens was still blinking red. It was actively recording his arrest. The cloud never forgets. 2 paramedics rushed through the marble foyer with a rolling stretcher. They dropped a heavy canvas medical bag onto the floor. One of them pressed a thick gauze pad against my bleeding shoulder. The smell of hospital antiseptic washed over me again. This time it smelled like pure victory. An officer grabbed Langston's arms. He slammed him face first against the custom marble island. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply through the kitchen. Beatrice finally dropped the crumpled forged will. It fluttered down and landed right in a puddle of my blood. Margot was already sitting on the floor, sobbing with her hands cuffed behind her back. I let the paramedics carefully lift me onto the stiff stretcher. I looked at my husband, who was suddenly looking very small. Location, deception, honey. You never did understand real estate. Topic chapter 17. The click of handcuffs is a lot like a closing door. It's the absolute sound of a transaction being finalized. I was sitting on the rolling stretcher in my marble foyer. A paramedic was pressing a thick gauze pad deep into my left shoulder. My bare feet were still bleeding onto the custom quartz floor. My torn stitches felt like burning acid across my stomach. But I didn't care. The adrenaline was a hell of a drug. 2 Coral Gables police officers had Langston pinned against the wall. His custom Prada loafers were completely soaked in my blood. An officer yanked his arms violently behind his back. The metal cuffs snapped shut with a harsh metallic crunch. Langston started sobbing right there in the hallway. Actual hyperventilating tears were streaming down his face. He looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Cat, please, tell them it's a massive misunderstanding," he screamed. "I can't go to federal prison. I'll die in there." I just stared at his pathetic, trembling face. The supposed mastermind of this hostile takeover reduced to a weeping toddler. Location, deception, Langston," I whispered. He thrashed against the officer's heavy grip. The cop shoved him roughly toward the mahogany front door. "We have a 3rd suspect upstairs," another officer called out from the landing. 2 cops dragged Margot down the sweeping staircase. She was cowering like a terrified wet rat. She was still wearing my $1,200 emerald green silk blouse. My grandmother's custom Colombian emerald ring was still squeezed onto her right index finger, and she was actually wearing my vintage Chanel sunglasses inside the house while actively crying. The lead officer pulled out his black notepad. "Add possession of stolen property to her charges," he instructed his partner. I watched Margot sob behind those massive dark lenses. I felt absolutely nothing for her. Just cold, absolute closure. The fraudulent tenant was finally being evicted from my life. Then there was Beatrice, the devil in the pale pink cashmere twin set. She was standing stiffly near the grandfather clock. Her delicate wrists were already locked in heavy steel. She wasn't crying like her useless children. She was vibrating with pure aristocratic rage. "You absolutely cannot do this," she hissed at the arresting officer. "Do you have any idea who I am in Naples?" The officer didn't even blink at her. "Ma'am, step toward the door right now," he ordered. Beatrice planted her expensive Italian leather heels into the quartz floor. "My family has an impeccable legal record," she shouted. That instantly triggered a memory in my exhausted brain, a sunny Tuesday afternoon at the Naples Country Club. Beatrice sipping an expensive mimosa, bragging to her wealthy friends about her pristine family reputation. The math wasn't mathing for her anymore. The officer gripped her elbow with zero hesitation. "Your social standing doesn't cover felony conspiracy, ma'am," he said politely. He practically marched her out the heavy front door. I pulled up the custom smart home app on my new phone. I navigated straight to my favorites folder. I tapped the live feed for the front porch camera. It was exactly 4:30 p.m. 3 police cruisers were parked in my circular driveway. Bright red and blue lights were flashing against the white columns of my mansion. I watched the glowing glass screen as they paraded my in-laws outside. Beatrice was desperately trying to hide her handcuffed wrists. She tucked them awkwardly under her pale pink cashmere sweater. It was a pathetic attempt to maintain her country club dignity. Margot was stumbling over the concrete pavement, still weeping loudly. Langston was just a defeated, broken slump of a man. An officer shoved his head down and pushed him into the cruiser. The paramedics finished tightly wrapping my bleeding shoulder. A young medic asked if I was ready to go to the hospital. I told him I just needed 1 minute. I watched the live feed until the last cruiser door slammed shut. The flashing police lights pulled out of my driveway onto the street. They drove away in 3 separate squad cars. I finally sat back on my sofa, alone in my beautiful, quiet house, and felt a sharp pain in my side. I sat alone on my green velvet sofa. The house was finally dead quiet. Then, a sharp, white-hot pain ripped through my left side. I gasped, gripping the pale silk cushions with bleeding fingers. My 1 minute of peace was officially up. Heavy boots crunched on the shattered crystal glass across my custom quartz floor. 2 paramedics walked back through my mahogany front door. They carried a heavy canvas medical bag and a rolling stretcher. "Time to go, ma'am," the taller paramedic said. I let them lift my bleeding body onto the stiff canvas. I was broken, bruised, and leaking blood onto my own expensive upholstery. But as they rolled me out the door, I was smiling. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The cold, acoustic ceiling tiles of hospital room 42012 are just a distant nightmare. The smell of harsh antiseptic is completely gone. Today, I am breathing in warm salt air. I am staring at a flawless turquoise ocean. I am lounging on a teak sunbed at a luxury resort in Bora Bora. The tropical sun feels incredible on my bare skin. I am completely, beautifully healed. The only physical reminder of that bloody Tuesday is a faint pink scar on my abdomen. And of course, a massive addition to my personal bank account. The divorce was finalized in absolute record time. Langston surrendered every single asset we owned. He did it to avoid me pushing for maximum sentencing on the wire fraud. It didn't save him anyway. The SEC raided his Breckle boardroom 2 days later. He traded his custom Prada loafers for a standard-issue federal jumpsuit. Margot took a cowardly plea deal for possessing stolen property. She ugly cried the entire time she handed my custom Colombian emerald ring over to the detectives. And Beatrice. Oh, Beatrice's downfall is my favorite piece of real estate history. Her pristine reputation in Coral Gables is absolute ashes. Her country club membership was revoked. She is currently serving 2 years of strict house arrest. She lives in a tiny 800-square-foot condo near the noisy highway. No heated pool, no sweeping marble staircase, just the smell of cheap drywall, stale regret, and total defeat. My commercial real estate firm is absolutely booming. Omari is now my exclusive mobile notary. He handles every single multi-million-dollar closing I broker. He still carries that same black leather portfolio. I pay him a ridiculous monthly retainer. He earned every single penny. I picked up my new phone from the teak side table. I snapped a picture of my tanned legs against the bright turquoise water. I opened Instagram. I typed the caption, "Living my best life." I hit post and watched the likes roll in. Then I picked up my custom silver Mont Blanc pen. I pulled out a glossy postcard from the resort gift shop. The front showed a pristine overwater bungalow. I flipped it over and wrote exactly 3 sentences. "Wish you were here, but glad you're not. Love, your favorite daughter-in-law." I addressed it to Beatrice's depressing little condo. Later, I walked down to the open-air lobby. I dropped the glossy card into the brass mail slot. The petty joy I felt in my chest was absolute perfection. So, that is my little Coral Gables confession. If this story hit you where it hurts, drop a like. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more of my real estate survival guides. Make sure you turn on notifications. Hit that bell so you never miss a closing. I want to know where you are watching this from right now. What time is it there? Drop a comment down below. I promise I read every single one. People think money makes you safe in this world. It doesn't. It just makes you a highly profitable target. They tried to rewrite my ending while I was asleep, but they forgot one thing. I always wake up.